Top of the morning to everybody. My name is Taylor Delhagen, and I get the pleasure, the honor of opening up our session, Fighting Like Hell for Our Kids, by introducing 7 badass teachers who continue to teach and learn in partnership with their students. But before I do, I gotta reflect with y'all because it's February. I'm a teacher, therefore I'm tired. I'm really, really tired, y'all. And I mean, it's like, I want you to think about this like a math problem, right? You got February, you got the short days, the long nights. You got teacher life, which is the exact opposite of long days and short nights, equating to utter fatigue. Now, I grew up in Teach for America. And I've realized as of late that I'm only hitting the surface of Mr. Feeney's tenure, and the only thing that I can do that he did is grow a mustache, and not even that well. And I'm worried because I'm tired. Now, don't get me wrong, staying in this sacred profession is absolutely my choice. It is. But like many of my colleagues, I'm starting to have these growing pains. You know, the ones you used to get when you were in middle school. You went to bed, you were 4 feet tall, you couldn't sleep at night because your bones hurt, and you woke up in the morning to find that you had magically sprouted a foot overnight. I am a very different teacher than I was in 2006, hair and facial hair notwithstanding. But unlike that middle school kid who got to grow a foot overnight, I don't feel like I'm getting taller at the pace that I used to and the pace that I need to. I got growing pains. I got growing pains that come from a lack of balance in a teacher's life, in a husband's life, and now in a father's life. That's right. I got growing pains that come from doubt. Doubt about my choice to stay in the classroom. Now, if I keep going with this growing up theme that I got rolling here, inevitably I'm going to have to talk about responsibility. And my wife's over there, and she's looking at me like, responsibility. Yeah. And at this point, I should be a responsible adult. I mean, I've been teaching for 10 years. That should be something that I am. And that leads me to the second reason why I'm tired. Responsibility, y'all, is pretty exhausting. And if that's the case, if responsibility is tiring, then y'all are pretty tired. Because everybody in this room is responsible for what Teach for America was, is responsible for what Teach for America is right now, and is responsible for what Teach for America will be 5, 10, 15, 25 years from right now. That's daunting to think about. I got you. But it's also something that actually makes me less tired. It makes me excited. I mean, think about it, right? Like we, in this room right now, we have the power to shape the future of Teach for America. And one way that we can do that is by listening and hearing the stories that we're about to hear. Listening and then changing. Changing the ways that we teach. Changing the ways that we see our students, their parents, as partners in this work. Changing the ways that we see our place at Teach for America. Now, our training at Teach for America will inevitably push us to try and find the trends and the patterns in these speeches that we're about to hear. That's cool. I like that. I applaud that. That is a worthwhile endeavor. But I'm going to ask that you actually pump the brakes a little bit on that and instead engage and relish in the uniqueness of each one of these teachers, their stories, their leadership. So go ahead. Shut the laptop. Put those fancy color-coded Excel sheets that y'all have and put them away for a second. And fiercely listen so that you too can find the strength to grow old in this work. Thank you. if you ever get a chance to ask somebody who's left the classroom after they've been teaching for a little bit if they miss it, a couple things are going to happen, right? The first thing that in my experience that I've seen happen is that person that you've asked, you miss it? This is what happens. They look at you, they smile a little bit with a half smile, they look down, and they look back up at you and they say, hell yes, I miss it. And inevitably they're going to talk about something that they did with their students. My easy response to you is, if you're one of those people, is to go back. We need you there. We need more people to grow up and choose to grow old in this work. Our first speaker did just this, making his story all the more easy to dance to. So please put your hands together and help me welcome Mr. Matthew O'Connor from the 2009 Houston Corps. Thank you, Hanvas.
There comes a point in every teacher's career when they begin to wonder, am I a lifer? Is this what I'm going to do forever? Am I past that point of no return? That moment might happen on your first day. It might happen 3 years in. There could be a day 7 years into your career where it happens every hour, on the hour, for a full day. Because this is not a job that becomes easy with time. Now, it might get easier, and you will have more skills and experiences to draw upon, but there will always be moments now and again where you think, shit, what have I gotten myself into? Again. How you handle those moments defines the type of career that you will have as an educator. I have certainly felt all those uncertainties before, and I was hoping to share today how navigating them has shaped how I teach. I'm now in my 6th year in the classroom, but as Taylor said, those years have not been contiguous. Midway through my career, I left the classroom and did marketing work for a money management company. Now, I imagine most current or ex-teachers in the room had people in your life who politely or impolitely tried to coax you out of the profession, who might elbow you in the ribs and repeat the tired old adage, those who can't do, you know? Quick side note, while I was preparing for this, I started huffily poking around on the internet to try to figure out who ever originally said that, and it turns out that the derivative quote appeared as, "He who can does, he who cannot teaches," in the famed Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw's Maxim for Revolutionists. Now, personally, I would argue that every good revolutionary thinker, large or small, needs some great teachers along the way, but that's another topic completely. We've all had well-meaning parents or slightly overbearing uncles or friends who have become consultants who look at us and ask, how long? Those questions are perhaps more plentiful in the early portion of the career of a young male pre-K teacher. There's no freedom rider fantasy for people to buy into when the learners are 4. In fact, a lot of people I met would confuse pre-K with daycare. Like one individual, a teaching candidate herself, who looked right at me and said, "Pre-K? That's great and everything, but that's not really teaching." Yeah, true story. Now, I have to acknowledge that I'm not free from responsibility in my decision to leave the classroom. I was asking myself all those same questions and absolutely making the same judgments. What I wasn't doing was asking other teachers, other members of a community of educators who I trusted. I didn't have one. I hadn't built my own community, nor had I really engaged with the many efforts that Teach for America Houston made, always preferring to operate professionally in isolation. So I was left to make this decision about whether to leave or whether to stay based on 3 years of shaky classroom experience. Well, 3 years and my own stereotypes about what it would mean to choose to be a career classroom teacher. Because we all have them. Teaching is a profession that's been around for thousands of years, and due to its longevity and its essentiality, we build a schema about what a career teacher looks like, acts like, and lives like, in a way that we haven't done for other jobs. The writer and storyteller Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has spoken about what she calls the danger of the single story. She says, "The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Now, I want to clarify that there are many and varied representations of teachers and academics throughout history, but I would also be hard-pressed to argue that there was not a prevailing narrative about what it would mean, about what the lifelong teacher is. And I think we have a lot of people within the world of education and outside of it who buy into that narrative. It's why we see a lot of our best classroom teachers drafted away from students to work mid-level administrative positions, who are told and who begin to think that they're too good to stay in the classroom. It's why we see successful kindergarten teachers asked to move to a testing grade. When most administrators or coaches I've worked with ask me, "What's your plan for the next X years?" there's the unspoken assumption that I will, of course, have left the classroom. I see the most successful teachers at the school I work at, mentors to me, who build beautiful relationships with the students they teach and have just begun to put down roots in the community of South Seattle where we teach, regularly asked, "When are you getting on the career ladder? You're really going places." To me, I see the influence of the single story in those moments, the presentation of the career teacher as a person diminished. And in the moment that I committed myself to leaving the classroom, I bought into that single story as a person whose potential was less than my own. I have to admit that when I started the new job, there was a grace period of about a month where I felt fantastic about the decision. I couldn't believe the freedom. The copiers never jammed. I had a full, uninterrupted hour for lunch. I started going to the dentist again, But once the haze lifted, it felt empty for me, and it felt challenging in all the wrong ways. My team was always having strategic meetings as opposed to taking any action. And it turned out that writing basic marketing materials was less of a cognitive puzzle for me than was teaching a 4-year-old to read his or her first words. Despite this revelation, the same friends and family who had been asking me how long I planned to stay in the classroom were now congratulating me on this great new career move. One day, though, as I sat in a meeting about the company's website, a coworker made a crack about the homogeneity of the company's executive board, nearly all of whom were straight white males. And the senior partner replied that really true diversity was about a way of thinking. I replied, or my suggestion that your identities and the way you thought about things were connected was met with quizzical looks, and I fumbled with my words because I honestly couldn't think of a simpler way to say what I was saying. When I considered that the institutional timeline of your life takes you from prep school to fraternity to country club, there's very little space left to ever encounter diverse ideas. In that moment, I felt the urge to be in the classroom again, to partner with brilliant young minds who held the potential to one day change the layout of that executive board. Now, nearly 4 years later, I'm so thankful for taking the time away that I did. It allowed me, at least for now, to answer some of the questions that I had about why I would want to continue to teach. But more than that, it changed the way I teach. I realized that I needed and wanted to connect on a deep level with other educators, people who could help me navigate those moments of doubt that I suspect I haven't shrugged off forever. If I had neglected to engage with a supportive community of like-minded individuals before, I resolved to do so differently. I re-entered the classroom at South Shore Pre-K-8 in Rainier Beach, a neighborhood in South Seattle. And over the past 3 years there, have prioritized nurturing substantial relationships with other teachers, both on my school campus, through the Teach for America Washington Regional Office, and through other external organizations like the Oakland-based Teaching Excellence Network. I have indeed found this community to be nourishing, both in obvious ways like help with lesson plans and troubleshooting problems in the classroom, but also less explicit and perhaps more important ways that I think come quite simply from knowing that there's a group of people out there I can turn to if I ever doubt my place in this work as I did before. Creating human connections beyond the professional made me a better teacher. And I realized then that if I needed those types of relationships to feel nurtured and nourished in the classroom, surely the students I partnered with deserved the same. I felt compelled to teach with empathy, to create a classroom environment where relationships between and among community mattered, and knowing how and why to build relationships like that was just as important as building academic knowledge and skill. In this way, my experience of leaving and returning elevated the empathetic classroom to become a central tenet of the work I wanted to do. Now, this direction was facilitated by some really powerful thought leaders like Bruce Perry and Maya Zalovitz, who are doing really exciting research right now on empathy and human connections and the implications these things have on the operations of a society. In their book, Born for Love, Why Empathy is Essential and Endangered, Perry and Salovitz write, empathy underlies virtually everything that makes society work. Trust, altruism, collaboration, love, charity. Failure to empathize is a key part of most social problems. Crime, violence, war, racism, child abuse, and inequity, to name just a few. These words ring undeniably true to me. Of course, real and substantial connections to the human beings around us make us better people. Surely, then, we foster these kind of relationship-minded thinkers in the classroom, don't we? Personally, I would argue that far too often we don't. In fact, some of the central tenets of American society are those of personal achievement and individualism. We root for the MVP, not the team. For young people, perhaps nowhere is this more true than the classroom. But what sort of person does this engender farther on down the line? What are the implications of framing success, primarily, even exclusively, by independent achievement, especially for low-income students and students of color? Are the experiences and challenges they see in life going to be something we hope they overcome alone? Likely not. Conversely, for the privileged white student, what effect would it have for him to participate in a classroom where not all of his accomplishments were seen purely as a result of individual merit? To provide an example, when I decided to leave the classroom and shot my resume around various places and secured the position at the asset management firm at which I would work, I lauded myself on the quality of my application and the smart answers I'd given during the interview. I realized later, though, that way more important than anything I'd done during the interview was the fact that I had an established personal relationship with 3 people employed at the company. Inevitably, they'd put in a good word for me. Now, what impact does it have on how I see the world when I devalue the contribution of my personal community and inflate my own sense of skill? Do we hope that children approach life in this way? I defer once again to Perry and Salovitz, who write that failure to understand and cultivate empathy could lead to a society in which no one would want to live. A cold, violent, chaotic, and terrifying war of all against all. This destructive type of society has taken root in many times and places throughout human history and still reigns in some parts of the world. And it's a type of culture that we could be inadvertently developing throughout America if we do not address current trends in child rearing, education, economic inequality, and our core values. Now, I want to quickly emphasize that I'm not calling for the cessation of individualism or arguing that we make less space in the classroom for the celebration of individual students' strengths and accomplishments. Rather, I would ask you to imagine a classroom with more space for the connection of one student to another and the empathy that those connections would inevitably beget. In my personal vision of the empathetic classroom, teachers still have year-end goals. Students are still measured against those goals by their successes, but the processes that help students progress center around core values of collaboration, personal identities, intrapersonal connections, and emotional intelligence. In the classroom, this would mean that teachers spend more time understanding the communities in which they teach, more time building relationships with and among students, and more time insisting on and creating space for dialogue between themselves and the communities they teach for about the quality of their own work. Just last week, my friend Max demonstrated his deep capacity for empathy when, listening to his classmate Anthony describe his own nuclear family unit, Max said, "You have 2 families, Anthony. You have us." Now, you might think that as a pre-K and kindergarten teacher, I have more time in my day to think about friendship and feelings. And in a lot of ways, you'd be right. I'm uniquely privileged to teach in a grade where we have an entire category of objectives called social-emotional learning. But I would say in response, why do we abandon this category? Do we enter first grade at the age of 6, suddenly able to control all impulses, identify and express all of our feelings, both wanted and unwanted? Brain science definitively says no. Does learning, does knowledge, at some point become separate from socialization or emotion? I certainly hope not. The most rigorous academic conversation I have ever seen students engaged in has been full of feeling, and not all of it well managed. A phenomenally skilled teacher and good friend of mine, Margot Munger, once said, "Good teaching must be an act of vulnerability." I would second that and add that good learning also happens in moments when vulnerability, with its accompanying risks of failure and transformation, feel possible. To be vulnerable is to be human, connected with others, and through the power of those personal relationships, tapped into the very essence of humanity and knowledge. For this to happen in the classroom, though, all participants must have a strong toolkit of social emotional skills, a knowledge of self, and authentically trust and care about those around them. I'd like to return to George Bernard Shaw for a moment, who equipped pop culture with its perhaps most singularly annoying weapon against the teaching profession. And I have to admit that I fell down a pretty dark hole researching why he ever wrote what he did. And it turns out I found this letter that he'd written to his future biographer, dated from the 19th century. And he wrote that schools and schoolmasters as we have them today are not popular as places of education, but rather turnkeys in which children are kept to prevent them from disturbing those around them. Now, we all know that students can say some pretty disparaging things about the classrooms we share from time to time. But if we take that description as accurate, even semi-accurate, can we blame him for later writing what he did? Is the reality that we teach in now so very different? But what if the young Shaws out there had a different kind of classroom? An empathetic classroom, wherein their humanity was not only valued, but necessary to the work that was being done within those walls? What if young Shaw shared the classroom with some of the students that I have the great honor of partnering with, like Eva Rose Colinares, who expressed a pointedly finessed understanding of gender identity when she engaged a group of boys in response to a book they had been reading, starring a female inventor as the main character? I think you boys say you like this book, she told them, but I don't think you like it the same way that I do. It's good for boys to think about how girls feel sometimes. Or Eric Turner, when seeking to express how much our relationship meant to him, said, "You know how I knew I could do my writing today? Because you reminded me that no matter what happens, I'm good, not bad." Or Hugo Santillan, when writing an opinions book about all of his favorite things in the world and knowing how important the state of Texas was to me, thought it absolutely necessary to ask my permission first if he could argue that being from Peru was in fact superior to being from Texas. He wrote the rodeo seems scary on there. If he goes, it really is a good time, but you know. Or Hayat Kadir, who, after reading the classic children's book Madeline and Madeline in London, noted skewed representation and asked, how come Madeline only ever went to London and never Vietnam? And took it upon herself to research and write a book in which Madeline did just that. These are students who, like all students and us, are born to see and explore the humanity in the world around them. And I think that if we see it as part of our job to partner with them and our fellow education stakeholders in that, then we will all find more success. And those inevitable professional crossroads might become just a little bit easier to navigate. Thank you.
Our second teacher hails from Midtown Academy in Baltimore and has a fiery passion for the oh-so-beautiful years of middle school. She is an advocate for middle schoolers in and out of the classroom, serving on the governor's education task force. In her own words, she says, "I want my students to develop a curiosity about the world and to develop the necessary tools to change it for the better." Put your hands together for Whitney Ward Birnbaum from the 2005 Baltimore Corps.
I'm going to ask y'all to do something uncomfortable, something you might not want to do. I want you to picture yourself in middle school. I know the associations aren't always pretty, hormonal, awkward, loud, opinionated. Not knowing whether you're a kid or an adult, wanting to be both sometimes, not really being either. Struggling to find your place in the world and desperately wanting to feel like you matter. I realized as I was preparing for this talk that I've spent more than half my life in middle school, if you count the time I was a student, and I've learned a few things. I've realized that these traits we associate with middle schoolers, being loud and opinionated, really just boil down to one thing: a desire to be heard. I want to talk to you today about how I've arrived at my core belief as an educator, that kids are motivated to do their best work when they know that their voices matter and they know they're being heard by a real audience outside of my desk or outside of my classroom walls. One project in particular really affirmed this belief. We were studying immigration in my humanities class. I teach 6th through 8th grade. And we were learning about immigration in the early 1900s, the rise of industry, immigration through Ellis Island, the growth of cities. But students kept coming back to questions about immigration today. Where do most immigrants in Baltimore come from? What's the process of becoming a citizen in our country today? Do people still come here for the same reasons they did 100 years ago? Their questions made it clear we had to shift our focus to the present day. I remember my student Maya saying, "Well, my dad's from Haiti, we can just ask him." Avery chimed in that Miss Melissa's from the Philippines, we can ask her why she moved here. We thought about, another student said, "I wonder if there's other families at our school that we don't even know about who have immigration stories." And so this was where our idea was born. We could interview people connected to our school about their immigration experiences and publish their stories in a book to teach other people about this experience. After sending a letter to all the families in our tiny school, we have 180 families, we got 16 replies from people from 13 different countries: China, Nigeria, Germany, Trinidad, Vietnam, the Dominican Republic. In the weeks that followed, kids worked in groups to interview their interviewees. They spent time during lunch and electives. And in class, groups worked together to turn those interview notes into stories, into narratives. I taught many lessons on writing an engaging hook, how to organize your thoughts and ideas in a way that really best tells your story, writing with vivid imagery. The skills I was teaching were the same I'd always been teaching as a humanities and language arts teacher. But now students were really engaged to learn them on a much deeper level. Even through a lengthy revision cycle, I think they wrote like 7 or 8 drafts of these narratives, students were motivated to get each story just right and bring them to life on the page. They really cared about telling their person's story. They designed the cover art, they voted on a title, they wrote a foreword, they developed a glossary of words, picked pictures, and at long last, we published Coming to America, Stories of Immigration from the Midtown Community. We even celebrated their hard work at a book release party, honoring our student authors and the people featured in the book. It was so inspiring to see the love which they had for their product, but also this newfound friendship they had with people in our community that they didn't know. Since then, I've worked to create a classroom that honors student voice both in big and small ways. I've let my students, their interests, their passions, their curiosities influence my instruction. One year, we were studying about issues of food justice, and we partnered with an urban farm in our neighborhood. When studying the Bill of Rights, my students focused on the debate surrounding the Second Amendment. They created persuasive podcasts calling Baltimore citizens to action around gun violence. And their podcasts were heard by Baltimore's police commissioner, the mayor's office, and a Baltimore Sun, the crime reporter from the Baltimore Sun. Seeing the impact of kids producing work for a real purpose and audience has led me to even want to create more opportunities outside of my own school. With a team of teachers and students, I co-founded the literary magazine Charm, Voices of Baltimore Youth. This year, we're working on our 3rd volume featuring the poetry, artwork, essays, stories of kids from all over Baltimore. You should follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CharmLitMag. It really speaks to this desire to be heard. I know as teachers we often talk about this sense of urgency. We're all under all this tremendous pressure for our kids to perform on standardized tests. It might seem like there's just not enough time to do projects like this. So I want to share that in the same year my students wrote this immigration book, 95% of my 8th graders and 100% of my 7th graders passed our standardized test that year. I think this data really underscores the fact that when students' voices are heard, deep learning happens, and that is time well spent. So one of my former students, Amber, who was in 8th grade the year that we wrote the immigration book, recently came to visit. And for those of you who teach middle school, my team, we always talk about how sometimes teaching middle school, you really don't always get to see the fruits of this seed that you plant. And so it's really awesome when kids come back and you get to see the wonderful people that they've blossomed into. Amber came back. She's a junior now at one of Baltimore's top high schools. She's applying for colleges. And she said, "Miss Ward, I still show people that immigration book." And when I asked her why, she said, "Well, it was a lot of work. It was really hard." But not only that, it just ignited in me a passion for learning other people's stories. It made me feel like I matter. So this weekend, as we're taking a time to reflect and renew our commitment to this amazing job and career, I can think of no greater reason to return to the classroom each year than to help kids realize this belief. I matter. My voice matters. My thoughts and ideas matter. I can make an impact on the world around me, not just in the future, but right now. Thank you.
If Whitney is facilitating the next generation of poets and storytellers, then it is appropriate to say that our next speaker is in the business of molding future scientists. Coming to us with over 10 years of teaching experience, she is a lover of the classroom and has a profound respect for the craft of teaching that will inspire you to do better, to be better. Please welcome 2015 TNTP Fishman Prize winner Erin Dukeshire to the stage.
Every evening, as I leave this building in Boston, I call my best friend from Teach for America. I met Catherine in the hotel lobby in Miami during induction in 2005. And on the way home from work, we both sit in traffic, and we talk about the successes our students have had. We rage about school drama. We talk about friendships and relationships, and usually there's this moment where somebody says, "Hang on, I gotta pay for a bottle of wine." And those conversations, I've been lucky because I've had this epic journaling experience about my teaching career through these daily calls. A few months ago, I called her. I just opened an email from TFA with the title of this session, Fighting Like Hell for Kids, award-winning teachers on staying in the classroom. And I said to her, I made a huge mistake. I have nothing to say. I don't fight like hell for kids, and I don't even know why they're calling this session that. And she responded with the cynicism and wisdom I expect from her. She said, "Yeah, that is an annoying title, but hon, you do fight like hell for kids." So I thought about this, and I realized in those early years when I was driving alongside palm tree farms to Homestead Senior High School in Miami, I was thinking, yeah, I'm gonna go fight like hell for kids. But actually, since those first years, that's not what I think about when I choose to return to the classroom every year. It's not what I think about when I choose teaching rather than, work in policy or work in nonprofit or work as a school leader, other ways to fight like hell for kids. And I worry that as we have all these awesome teachers up here who've been in this for a while, calling this session Fighting Like Hell for Kids means we're setting up the expectation that that should be enough to keep you in this work for a really long time, and that it should always feel just that hard every single day, because that's both daunting and maybe not enough to make people want to stay teaching. And I really want effective teachers to continue being my colleagues and being there for our awesome kids, being there for these guys. Well, the guys that I can see on my computer. So I think that for a lot of us, working on equity is really automatic, but choosing teaching is not necessarily automatic. And so through these daily conversations with Catherine, I've really been able to sort out like what it is that I need from teaching, from this profession, to stay in it, to make teaching my role in the fight like hell for kids. And the reasons, to be honest, are pretty selfish. There are things that I get out of teaching, and I've made teaching sort of give to me. And it's uncomfortable to say that because I think it feels nicer to say, like, yeah, we all do this because we want to fight like hell for kids. But I want to insert some reality into the title of this session. Insert some words that maybe describe more accurately those conversations Catherine and I have every day, and like the real feelings I have about the choice to stay in the classroom for these 11 years. So the first word that I would insert into the title is having fun, because there are so many days on the way home when I say to Catherine, like, can I just tell you about this really cool thing we did today? Teaching 12-year-old science is awesome. So like an example of a lesson that I would tell her about is I teach kids that matter is made of particles too small to be seen. This is like mind-blowing for 6th graders. And I do this by, I tell them that, and then I hand out these amazing particle goggles lent to us by MIT. They're going to let kids see particles. And they're really just green oak tag taped to a popsicle stick. So some kids get it. Some kids like are really excited. They think they're going to work. Some kids are like skeptical. And I put up this animation of solid, a liquid, and a gas on the screen, just like an ice cube and a drop of water and stuff. And right before that animation is going to flip to the molecular view of things, I tell everybody, put your goggles on. And every year, every single 6th grader puts those goggles on. They really want to see particles. They want to see what can't be seen, and that is so fun for me. It makes me really happy to create these like imaginative experiences, but also like real lab experiences to help kids see what can't really be seen. This work is important, but it's also really fun. Then there are times when it's not, right? Like there are the days that Catherine's voicemail makes me stop talking because I'm yelling so loud that it doesn't register what I'm saying as actual speaking. And I think that the phrase like hell suggests that we are dealing with those obstacles. We are doing everything we can despite those obstacles to help kids. But I can't do that. Honestly, if I fought like hell for kids every day, I wouldn't still be teaching. And so I had to learn to also take it easy. Several years ago, I called my dad, who is a retired teacher. I was crying in the faculty room of the school where I taught. I was working all the time, and it was crazy. And he said that to me. He said, this is crazy. You're 26 years old. You can't keep doing this. And at the end of the year, I left for another school, which is a turnaround school. It is really hard work. We work like hell. But there's more flexible expectations on teachers. So in that first year of the turnaround, if we stayed late to work on a culture event, then all of my friends and colleagues, we kind of realized, yeah, we're not going to grade as much this year. And these days, I choose to go for a run instead of making a homework. Or I go out to dinner and stretch what should be a one-day lesson into 2, because I have the flexibility to do that. It doesn't feel good to take shortcuts for kids, but I think I have to. I think I have to learn to take it easy to be able to stay in this work. That feels selfish to say a little bit, and I'm just going to keep on that path and add the word adults into this title. I've noticed that over the years, at first, Catherine and I talked a lot about individual kids, so like Robert's reading level, or like the fit Shakaya through in science class. But now we talk a lot more about our own professional growth as adults doing this work. And I had a really cool experience recently where I got to see how focusing on my own development as an adult in the classroom got to benefit kids. I was at a conference. I went out for coffee into the lobby, and this woman came up. She got in my face, and she said, "You're Erin Dukeshire. You're the reason I'm still teaching." It was this woman, Katrina. She teaches in Kentucky. I had never seen her before in my life. I had no idea what she was talking about. And she said she was going to quit teaching. It was the previous spring, and she felt frustrated. She felt alone in her work, and she Googled, "Why should I not quit teaching?" And when she did that, she found an op-ed I wrote. And I had written this op-ed about how I thought I wanted to leave the classroom, but then I found out about these cool opportunities for teacher leadership roles and teaching policy fellowships, and that made me excited about staying because they gave me new challenges and ways to develop my own skills. And she said, so you mentioned this policy fellowship, and I applied and I got in, and here I am, and I'm still teaching. And Katrina wasn't focusing on her kids when she decided to do that. She was focusing on what she needed as a professional, the growth she wanted. I wasn't thinking about Katrina's kids in Kentucky when I wrote the op-ed. I just wanted to learn to write about teaching. And so I think that for me, this career has offered, because I've sought out opportunities, it's offered a chance to work on my own development alongside kids who are learning. So the title, Fighting and Having Fun Like Hell and Taking It Easy for Kids and Adults. That's my title for this session. That's what it feels like for me to keep choosing to teach in a high-needs school. And I'm wondering, if you're a teacher now, what would your title be? What would you need to make this work for you? Do you have access to what you need? And if not, can you find it or can you create it? If you're a school leader, are you helping your effective teachers figure out what they need? And are you inviting them to partner with you to create it? I want effective colleagues to stay, to work with me, to teach the kids that I teach. And I think to get more people to stay in this work, we need to think more carefully and talk more honestly beyond just fighting like hell for kids. Thanks.
Erin's call to action could not be a more appropriate introduction for our next speaker, who's found what he needs to keep coming back to the classroom year after year after year. You can keep going with that. Mr. Rob Garza's 2002 placement school happened to be his alma mater in the Rio Grande Valley. He has made his home his classroom. He has made his classroom his home, and how can you leave that? Please welcome Mr. Rob Garza to the story floor.
Check mic level, all good. So I'm an immigrant to this country. My parents moved to Texas from Mexico when I was 3 years old, and that decision has shaped both who I am and how I see the world. As soon as we arrived, my mother made sure I learned the language, so I would be ready for school. But when the day finally came, the expectations I faced in school were set more by the fact that I came from another country instead of what I was capable of accomplishing. For several days, I was sat in a corner, and I was listening to See Spot Run, See Jane Run, because my teacher hadn't quite realized I already spoke English. Despite this rough start, my parents and some amazingly inspiring teachers pushed me ahead to success. And that's where my story as an educator begins. Expectations can be what lifts us up to great heights or what weighs us down into mediocrity. I've been teaching in the same classroom for 14 years now, in the same school I graduated from. And the question I get asked the most is, why do I keep coming back for another year when things seem to be getting seemingly harder for educators? Well, my response comes down to this. There's many seemingly impossible things to fix in this world. I've chosen this one. John F. Kennedy Jr. in 1962 spoke at Rice University in Houston and said, "We choose to go to the moon and do other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard." His point was that many things worth doing in life present us with challenges, often seemingly impossible challenges, and that's why we should do them. 25 years ago, Wendy Kopp put forth her own vision, that one day every child would have the opportunity to get a quality education. And to an outsider looking in, that was probably just as seemingly as difficult as JFK's goal had proposed. But what both these visions had in common was that they set the expectations above what others thought was possible. And that's exactly how we should approach our students. Our students enter our classrooms with their expectations already set upon them by former teachers, their parents, students, all sorts of people around them. And these expectations shape the way our students see themselves. And quite often, it affects their performance in the classroom. See, I've never been great at math. I wasn't bad at it, but I wasn't great at it either. But my mother always told me I was smart and good in math, even when my report card kind of said otherwise. And that helped me continue to strive to get better, even when things didn't look very promising. By the end of my senior year, I had taken pre-calculus honors and earned an a self-fulfilling prophecy of high expectations. This experience came to mind many years ago when a young man joined my video production class his junior year. Every day he wore a white undershirt, baggy work jeans, steel-toed boots, and a gold chain, and wore his hair very short. He was quiet and kept very much to himself. I had the chance to speak with him during the week of registration, and I knew he was in fact very friendly, compassionate, and played guitar in his church youth group. Now, all of my students kind of saw this rough exterior around him and were a little nervous around him because they thought he looked like a gang member. The first couple of weeks, there was an uncomfortable tension in the class until the first group project happened, and that's where it all changed. His group saw him for what he was, for who he was, and soon he was the first one picked for every single project. By the end of the year, he was voted most handsome, best editor, and best all around at our awards banquet. He came back for his senior year, and that's when I realized just how truly deep expectations can affect us. Every year I do a college talk with my students around the time of college applications. We talk about application process, about FAFSA, financial aid, test scores, and essays. I try and sit with every senior to see how they're doing in the process. When I got to this student, I found out he had no plans, no college aspirations, and hadn't even taken the SAT or ACT test. It wasn't because he wasn't capable of it, and certainly not because his family wasn't supportive. He just didn't think it was in his future because of his low grades in the past. His family came from Mexico and were incredibly supportive of his education, but none had ever been to college, and so they weren't aware of how our system worked. Nobody had ever talked to him directly about how to get to college and what it took. That day, I took him to our college counselor and sat with him to start his application and sign up for the SAT. I took him on our annual college and career trip to visit college and media businesses. And I encouraged him to pursue a career in video production, which he happened to be incredibly good at. Now, while in high school, he struggled to keep his grades up. But once in college, he thrived in his classes. He had shed the low expectations set on him by others, and he began to believe in himself. A few years ago, he became the first member of his family to graduate from college, and he's now working in a national company doing marketing videos for them. See, the key to remember is that you aren't in this fight alone. JFK didn't work on the space shuttle to make it happen. He set the vision, provided the funding, and hundreds answered his call. He was one part of a very large network that fulfilled the mission. The same is true in our classroom. As a teacher, we often get stuck in the idea that we are Superman, that we will make a connection with every student and see that change throughout the school year. That's been the toughest thing for me to accept, that I wouldn't be able to reach every student and sometimes not see them succeed in that school year. Now, allow me to explain what I mean by that. My school is a network of teachers, 150 plus educators, counselors, administrators, and support staff that are all working to make our vision happen. If everyone does their part, then every student will be reached by someone, and that's how we achieve our mission. I don't spend my time trying to figure out what students I can reach and put my focus solely on them. Instead, my effort is to make an impact on all my students, with the assurance that my peers will be doing the same. And together, we'll raise the bar of expectations for all of our students. Just as some of those that started working in the Apollo missions never got to see the moon landing, so too I may not see some of those students succeed in the classroom. But by giving them hope, they stand a chance at succeeding in life. We must remember that intelligence is measured in many ways, many more than just with grades and test scores. Just a few weeks ago, during a class discussion, one of my students said he could never be president because he wasn't smart. I asked him what he meant by that he wasn't smart. His reply was he didn't earn great grades and his state test scores were pretty much average. My response to him was the following: You play baseball, and you're a pitcher. On any given day, during any given game, you gauge win factor into your throws. You make split-second decisions on which base to throw at. You compare batter statistics to decide which type of pitch to throw and what type of impact a metal bat has versus a wooden bat. You've used math and science in every decision and succeeded at it better than the average person. His face lit up. A smile broke across his face. Now, I don't know if he'll ever be president, but at least now I know he knows he has a choice to. And that's our goal. That's our mission. To return every year to our classroom, ready to raise the bar of expectations for all of our students, to free them from the idea that the past will determine their future. I leave you with this. Today I stand before you speaking on this stage, having traveled around the world, having covered presidential elections during my times as a reporter and news producer, and having been honored by TFA with an award. And all this because many years ago, my parents and my teachers saw past my poor math skills and a language barrier and decided to set the bar high for me to succeed. Thank you.
I mentioned earlier that my wife and we welcomed a little dude into our family this past September. We named him Rumi, after the 13th century Sufi poet whose writing encompasses love and empathy that both my wife and I, who's also a teacher, we seek to bring to our own classrooms. One of Rumi's lines, he goes, "Let the beauty you love be the life that you live." Our next speaker embodies this premise. From the moment she walks onto this story stage, you will be unable to avoid the truth and the fun and the care that she brings for each one of her students. You'll feel it. So please help me welcome Kathy Hollowell-Makel from the 1998 DC Corps.
Thanks, Taylor. I feel the love. I was once asked, how do I return to the classroom year after year? Well, I thought about it and I reflected on the question, and I realized that my intentions and my motivations had evolved through my 18-year career. During my first years of teaching, my first and second years of teaching, I wasn't a great teacher after 2 years. I wasn't the worst, but I surely wasn't the best. So I was fortunate to work in a school that supported teachers, respected the time of the teachers, to mentor others, and to collaborate laterally and vertically. So after my 2-year commitment, I opted to teach a 3rd year. I really, really wanted to be a better teacher. During my early years of teaching, I was fortunate to work with a veteran teacher who had 30 years of experience named Mrs. Watson. I met Mrs. Watson on my first day at my first school of my first year. I was assigned to the classroom, her classroom, that she'd occupied for 30 years. Now, this was 1998, so she'd been in the same classroom in the same school since 1968. Now, as teachers, we know we all have habits that we don't readily admit to, mainly hoarding. A funny side note is, as teachers, we collect things, right? So I'm a primary teacher, so I like to collect seeds. And seeds, if you've noticed, have become very, very scarce lately. They are hardly in any foods that we eat now. And so when I find seeds, I like to wash them and I put them in the window of the kitchen, in the windowsill. And so my husband, who's here, one day opened the window and the seeds went everywhere. And I said, "Why did you open the window? My seeds were in there." And he says, "Who the hell put seeds in a window?" So it's just about that hoarding. So it took Miss Watson literally 2 weeks to move out of the room that I was in. So over the 2 weeks that she came back every day to clean out her closet, I peppered her with questions. I wanted to know the who, what, whens, and whys of learning. And she became annoyed with me, but she was really a nice lady, so she tried to give me as much advice as she could. So one day, she looks at me annoyed when I'm asking her for like the 100th time on how to do something. And she says to me, whatever you want them to know, you tell them. Whatever you want them to do, you show them. Whatever you want them to be, you be it. And then I thought, well, that's pretty easy. I know how to show, do, tell. I understand, but I realized then that I knew exactly what to do, but I realize now I didn't know what to do. I went about the year, and I was doing everything she told me. I was doing, showing, telling, and all that good stuff, but nothing was sticking. So as I would see her, it got to the point that she would run the other way, because I would always say, well, what do I do with this? And she would always look at me very nicely, and she would say, again, whatever you want them to know, tell them. Whatever you want them to do, show them. And whatever you want them to be it. Well, still failing, I had my first clarifying moment with a student named Antonio. Antonio's mother had come to school one morning, and she came to me rather abrasively, and she said, what did you do with my son? And I said to her, well, what do you mean? And so she went on explaining very vaguely, or trying to explain something that she said Antonio came home wanting her to buy that we'd done in school. And so after a while, it kind of sunk in. She was talking about a pineapple. And so I said, oh, you mean a pineapple? She says, yeah, that's it, a pineapple. Just a regular pineapple that you buy from a grocery store. Now, the previous days, we had been working on the letter P, and I'd brought in a pineapple so that we could have a sensory connection as to pineapple begins with the letter P, the sound P. But then it hit me that the lesson was pretty much lost. Because if Antonio couldn't name a pineapple, how could he remember that it began with the letter P? That was the first moment I realized that it wasn't just about telling students, that students also needed an experience. It also was a clarifying moment that students didn't have deficits, they lacked the experiences that they needed to connect with the material. Yes, thank you. From then on, I set about trying to create all experiences for my kids. So as a kindergarten teacher, it wasn't simply enough to tell the children about a camping trip. We had to create a camping trip. It wasn't simply enough to tell the children about a sleepover. We had to have a sleepover. So from that moment, whatever you want them to know, you not only tell them, but you give them an experience. Next, Ms. Watson reminded me, whatever you want them to do, you show them. I had a student named William once. William was busy, kind of distracted easily, and he was just downright out mischievous. Well, one day we were in a small group, and we were working on beginning and ending sounds. William asked to be excused to the bathroom, and so I told him he could go. And then after about literally 10 minutes, I realized William hadn't come back. And I looked over at the sink, and he was just methodically washing his hands. And I became annoyed, and I said, William, return to the group right now. And he says, no, it says right here on the sign that I need to lather for 20 seconds. And at first I thought, he's not really reading that sign, is he? And then I get up and I go over and I said, William, read the sign to me. And he read the entire thing. What he was doing, he was following the procedures of washing his hands. But this was kindergarten. The boy could read. I missed it. Now, let me say, this was not September. This was easily February. Totally missed it. And then I thought, what kind of teacher am I? The boy's been sitting here the whole time. He's able to read, and I'm teaching him beginning and ending sounds. Clarification. Thanks, Mrs. Watson. If you're going to show children, if you want them to do something, and show them something show them something new, not something they already know how to do. The last thing Miss Watson always shared with me, whatever you want them to be it. I tried to be lots of things. I tried to speak perfectly. I tried to model my behavior perfectly. I tried to be everything that I thought a good teacher would be, to model for them. And then one day, as I'm walking by the office with my class, the principal tells me, "Oh, Miss Hallowell, your children take on your personality." And then I thought to myself, hey, is that a compliment? I took it as such, and I continued on. I always wanted my kids to be kind, so I was considerate of them. I want my kids to be honest, so I praise them for telling the truth. I want my kids to be trustworthy, so I give them opportunities to trust them. I want them to be helpful, so I help them. I want them to be perseverant, so I give them lots and lots of chances. And when I think about the power of chances, I think about one student in particular. His name was Michael. And Michael had a very rough start in my kindergarten class. During his kindergarten year, his grandmother went missing from the L'Enfant Metro Station right here in Washington, D.C. His mother and his uncle were implicated in his grandmother's disappearance, although never formally charged. His father abandoned the family, and his mother was a very bad substance abuser, and she began subsequently running from a drug dealer in the neighborhood, which caused Michael to miss an excess of 45 days of school. Michael, needless to say, had many issues. He was my kindergarten student, but I remained his teacher throughout his entire elementary school career. See, Michael was removed from his mother's custody several times, and each time he was removed, he had to change schools. But he eventually was returned to his mother's custody, and each time he returned to our school, and he came back angrier, more aggressive, and more disrespectful with everyone but me. He exhausted his teachers. But everybody in the building knew that Michael was my baby, and I would accept him each and every time they threw him out, which was just about weekly. He exhausted them. And each time he came, he knew that I gave him a chance, that when he walked through that door, regardless of what he'd done and what he'd said, he had a chance to turn it around with me. During his 6th grade year, Michael had a teacher that he couldn't stand, and guess what? She couldn't stand him. So literally, he showed up at my door 4 out of the 5 days a week. He opted to sit in a kindergarten chair with his knees pushed to his chest. He felt totally at home, although out of place. Michael graduated from 6th grade, and he came back periodically to visit me as he had a younger sibling. But after a while, I didn't see Michael anymore. I'd heard from other students that the streets had called him, and he'd answer, and he'd been locked up in juvie. Another staff member who was able to visit him went to see him. And she says the first thing he wanted to know was, does Miss Hallowell know that I'm in here? And she said, yes, she knows you're in here. And I was touched that he still cared. But I also was disappointed that he didn't realize that he would always have a chance with me. After that, I lost all tracking of Michael. I hadn't seen him, hadn't heard from him. I'd heard through the grapevine that he'd gone to a residential facility for young offenders to reform their lives. And unfortunately, he passed away on his first weekend home, a victim of gun violence. So when people ask me about why do I return to the classroom every year, I return because of Michael. I return to give those students who need a chance a chance. And I ask you, when I return to help students, will you return to help students? Because they need me, but they need you too. Thank you.
A couple of years ago, I got the pleasure of collaborating with our next speaker at a Teach for America leadership retreat. Her passion for the classroom was palpable, and she left me feeling empowered to go and teach that following Monday. About a month after this leadership retreat, I received a package from her with children's books. This is pre-kid, and one of which was based on a story written by Leo Tolstoy, wherein he asks 3 questions. The first is, when is the best time to do things? The second is, who is the most important person? And the third is, what is the right thing to do? I'm going to spoil it for you, and the book ends with this. Remember that there is only one important time, and that time is now. The most important person is always the one that you are with, and the right thing to do is that what is good for the one who is standing at your side. This is why we are here. And for the 2013 Fishman Prize winner, Jenny Corey-Poros, she is here to teach. Please welcome Jenny to the story stage.
I left the classroom after my 4th year teaching. I was so burnt out. I had spent the first 3 incredible years going 7 out of 8 rounds a day as the 8th grade Project Read teacher at Roma Middle School. And part of the challenge in those early years was convincing people I should even stay in this class for struggling readers at all. The previous teacher, also a core member, had left behind little more than a stack of ominous office referrals for uncontrollable behavior before making his escape to a regular English classroom, and everybody agreed I should follow him there as quickly as possible. But I insisted on staying, and I didn't write that many office referrals, but I took what I now see as my first stand on an issue of staying in a classroom. One of the many reasons I'm glad I stayed in Project Read was that in my 2nd year, I met Jesus, whose only question to me on the first day of school was, "Miss, do you speak Spanish?" Jesus was a recent immigrant student who had never taken a Texas state test in his life, so he was put in my class, which was designed to support the over 100 students who had failed the reading test in 7th grade. At the time, it was called the TAKS, the Texas Assessment of Knowledge and Skills, and this high-stakes assessment loomed large over all my students that year, but particularly over Jesus, because for him, it was his first chance to prove whether or not he could succeed at education in the U.S. He worked so hard. Every 6 weeks, we stood in front of the goal mountain in my classroom, a place where students could post their short and long-term goals, and we discussed his progress. At first, we had very real conversations about how past the next benchmark was probably not a good goal after receiving somewhere in the 20s or 30s on the most recent one. But by the spring, Jesus was scoring in the 60s on the benchmark, and he beamed with pride when we agreed that pass the TAKS was a smart goal for him in April. The smile we shared when he taped that goal to the mountain said it all. We knew it was possible, and the anticipation of the opportunity for him to prove it put a palpable energy in the air. And for the first and probably only time in my career, I was looking forward to a TAKS test. But that excitement was quickly crushed when we found out that the school had decided to remove Jesus from the testing roster. It turns out we could exempt him based on his recent immigrant status. It wasn't worth it to have him take the test if he didn't have to, because if he failed, it would hurt the school's numbers. It would be better for the data this way. It just wasn't worth the risk. It was heartbreaking to see Jesus put all of this together. He would not get the chance to find out if he could achieve his goal of passing the TAKS test in April because his other reading teacher, the one of record, who taught the mainstream reading class Jesus also took, was afraid he couldn't pass, or figured it wasn't worth the risk to find out. or because maybe the administration had said we couldn't take the chance that he would fail, or any number of other reasons that I'm sure we can all understand. None of it changed the only way Jesus was going to see things. They don't think I can do it, so they're not going to let me try. I nervously went to go talk to Jesus' reading teacher of record. We looked at the data, and we talked about the blow to Jesus' self-esteem if we didn't let him take this test. We weighed the value of the school's overall numbers and the value of giving Jesus a chance to achieve his goal. Man, I really thought we should let him take the test. It was easy for me to say at the time, and perhaps a bit naive. Who knows, if I was in the same situation today and it was my performance evaluation, or my pay scale, or my reputation riding on the 1% difference that every child's score can make, maybe I'd feel differently. But at the time, I was crushed right alongside Jesus when the decision came he would not be allowed to test. The people who were making the choice just didn't think it was worth it. And it was easy for me to start asking the same question. Had it been worth it? All of that time Jesus and I had poured in, should I have been spending it on kids whose scores mattered that year? Of course, I knew in my heart that it was worth it, and I also knew that it wasn't the end of the world. Jesus' classmates went on to take the tax test without him, many of them envying his exemption. And Jesus went on to sign my middle school yearbook, to graduate from middle school, and to give me a pair of earrings from his mother's jewelry shop in Mexico as a parting gift. But the real gift came the following year when Jesus was a freshman in high school. And one day, out of the blue, a random 8th grade student who I didn't even teach bounced into my classroom and said, "Miss, do you remember Jesus Perez from last year?" "Yes," I said, of course, smiling fondly. And she said, "Well, he rides my bus and asked me if I'd come and tell you he passed his English test this year in 9th grade." Man, it was one of those moments where it is so easy to be certain that every minute with Jesus had been worth it. But you know, those moments can only take you so far, and they can only sustain you for so long in the classroom, which is why a few years later, I left teaching. I was so burnt out, and I took a more sustainable job in education. And I didn't see it this way at the time, but it was my second major indicator that the greatest struggle an excellent teacher will face in his or her career is the struggle to stay in the classroom at all. Fortunately for me, I returned to the classroom 2 years later. And of course, once again, I found myself preoccupied with the particular struggles of one student, this time one whose low expectations of himself astounded me. At every turn, it was, "Miss, it's too much work," and "I'm right, miss, that's too hard." Arturo was exhausting. We did battle for 2 years, sometimes alongside each other and oftentimes against each other. We'd spend grueling hours after school while I dragged work from him one sentence at a time. I fought tirelessly to get him to believe that it was worth it to stay in our school long enough to graduate, much less to accept the idea of the work ahead in college. And fortunately, Arturo did finish high school. He decorated his commemorative brick in the senior hallway. It's right outside my door. I see it almost every day. And he went on to enroll in high school, or in college. And I looked forward to hearing a message from him, not unlike the one that I had heard from Jesus after our time together. And sure enough, Arturo reported back that freshman English was in fact a very manageable class. Another epic battle won, right? Right. Until Arturo didn't enroll in his 3rd year in college. Until his Facebook check-ins went from college campus spots to random cities on the oil rig circuit. Until he started counting against our school's goal of graduation from college for all. And then one day, someone asked me the question, "All that time you spent with Arturo, man, was that worth it?" And my gut reaction was to be so hurt and insulted. How could you ask me something like that? How could you even suggest that even a minute of the time with Arturo wasn't worth it? But of course, I have to admit that I ask myself the same question sometimes, just like I did after the time with Jesus. Just like I do when a student withdraws from our school or drops out of college or doesn't pass the final test. And that's why I keep a card posted in my classroom with a reminder of the answer. It says, even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. It's there to remind me that the value of the work we do is not contingent on the results we are inclined to measure. The worth comes every day in the value we bring to each other's lives, and that can never be taken away, no matter what the final result. And the fight for that worth and for that value is worth it, no matter how glorious or mundane the work it takes to get there. Which is important to me, increasingly important to me, because as the years go by, even those moments of victory feel less and less glorious. Which makes me question myself at times. Am I fighting like hell for kids? Because man, it just feels like I'm doing my job. And the things that once felt so epic, these days feel routine. And the answer is both. I'm just doing my job. And that means I am fighting like hell for kids day in and day out. It's just that I no longer require the constant battle wounds to remind me that I'm fighting. I no longer need an individual child's story as a souvenir of my time in the classroom because I'm still in the classroom. And after all the hard-won battles over the years, in my 10th year teaching, I hesitate to see things as headline-worthy victories sending me home with another token story about helping a struggling child. Because my students' lives and their dignity and their stories are worth more than that. And because the stories alone cannot sustain us for a lifetime in the classroom. They can't keep us doing this work, and as teachers, that's what we need to do. We need to keep doing this work, even when the thrill of figuring out how to do it has worn off. Even when the work is more mundane than glorious, because day to day, it's not glamorous. It's not glamorous, but the time it takes me to chase Ricardo down for skipping a class that isn't even mine, that's fighting like hell for kids. And the hours it takes to make sure that every IB assessment essay meets the requirements, that too is fighting like hell for kids. Choosing the classroom year after year is fighting like hell for kids. And when the world, our organizations, our own exhaustion, and our ambition can sometimes urge us to move on, or to move up, or to go have a bigger impact by leaving the classroom, choosing to teach can be the greatest struggle an excellent teacher will face in his or her career. And I'm in. Because while the fights for Jesus and Arturo are real and they are worth it, I believe that the fight that will take us to one day is a struggle to keep more excellent teachers in the classroom. Thank you.
Okay, our last speaker hails from South Carolina and brings that southern hospitality that we all have a soft spot for. But don't be fooled. Don't be fooled by the charm. With decades of experience, Mr. Ed Chambers is repulsed by mediocrity and will push and push and push until you can't stand it either. He opens the windows of literature for all of his students. He has been a propeller of excellence since 1992. He is a teacher. So please, put your hands together and help me welcome Mr. Ed Chambers to the story stage.
In my classroom, there's a poster with the quote from Aristotle, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. Initially, I got that poster and put it in plain view for my students to remind them of my daily expectations. However, asking for excellence comes with a cost, and I have to show my students the real cost of mediocrity, of settling for the status quo. I have to show them that redos sometimes should be redon'ts. I have to show them what it means to truly be competitive if they plan on going to a big school, a small school, any school at all. I have to move them emotionally, intellectually, and occasionally physically. I have to overcome any objections to learning to get them to see excellence is attainable. I have to plant seeds before growth can occur. On the first day of school, 5 minutes before the bell dismisses them to their next class, I introduce two things. The first, the last two lines from the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And the other, a quote from the French philosopher Frantz Fanon. Mastery of language affords remarkable power. The first, I tell them their first homework assignment is to write a 3 to 5 minute valedictorian speech to test whether they are ready to steer their own ship and to test whether they have mastered enough language so that we might see their power. On presentation day, each student stands in front of the podium, puts on the cap and gown, and shares their experiences, their tears, their revelations. We sit waiting to laugh or cry as students scratch the surfaces of struggles, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. We applaud them all. However, as I stated previously, excellence comes with a cost because you can't ask them to bear their souls without bearing your own. As September ends and we begin to talk about college applications, I await my students at the door wearing a backpack weighted down with dictionaries. They watch me trudging around the room as they engage in the do now. I interrupt. We all have bags that keep us from moving beyond the places where we are. Some of us have trunks. Some of us have backpacks. Some of us have wallets. It does not matter the size, it can hold us down. For me, I am the son of a whore who learned very early that magicians weren't the only people who did tricks. Everything stops. I lean back and have the closest student remove a dictionary from the bag. I tell them my story, removing dictionaries along the way. I tell them about my own miseducation and disappointment when I got to college. They know I sat in a school very much like the one in which I teach. I end my story. If you really knew me, you would know I cannot afford to let you fail. I cannot afford to let you be mediocre because you are the only future I have. The backpack is empty and hangs listlessly from my shoulder. I call on a student. Chris, if we really knew you. He tells of homelessness. Alicia tells of her mother dying of AIDS and never telling anyone because she thought no one could relate. Marcia tells of her mother's mental instability and her steady decline as each one of her siblings has left home for college, and she is afraid to leave home because she is the last one. Sheila tells of her mother's crack addiction. Jalandria tells of the multiple siblings that have arrived at her home since 7 and how she has gained more responsibility as each one has come. Ebony tells of how she tried to take her life last year because of bullying. Montez reminds us that at 14, he passed out in the delivery room when his son was born, and how at 17, he can't seem to catch his breath because the mother of his child has moved away and he just has no focus anymore. Corey tells us of his dream to attend Wake Forest, despite a 26 on the ACT, passing 2 AP exams, being ranked 15th in the class. His father still views him as a failure because no one has offered him a football scholarship. Raquel enlightens us on the pressures of having everything and not wanting to be a disappointment. My students have let the mastery of their language unpack their bags. Their hurts, their disappointments lay bare. Students get up and put a hand on the shoulder of other students whose words are so constrained by tears but determined to go on. By the time the bell rings, we are emotionally raw, and there is no need to remind them of confidentiality. When they return the next day, the empty backpack and dictionaries sit by the door, and the first question they ask is, who is wearing the backpack today? And I tell them it is a visual reminder that they have found the words allowing them to lighten their loads. I tell them they have mastered the language to do so. I try to lighten their loads so life doesn't get the best of them. I try to focus them on the positives in their lives through Thankful Thursdays and High Five Fridays. I try to lighten their loads so the excellence that has eluded so many of them is attainable, and load them up with different faces and strange names to show them the universality of experience. I try to reassure them that success is in their future. I try to make them feel like the most valuable resources known to man, regardless of how rough of a diamond they might be. A few days after we had shared our souls, Destiny walks up with the attitude of a girl who's seen too much, and I know she has because I taught her brother who shared with us that his mother was somewhat like my own. My friends told me how you had them all crying, she said. I am ready. My reply, okay, we'll see. For 23 years, it is that anticipation, that readiness that keeps me going back. They issue a challenge. They stop by periodically. Mr. Chambers, are you coming back next year? Mr. Chambers, is your class really hard? Mr. Chambers, I heard about you. How could I not go back? Students don't come looking for teachers. We often go looking for them. And at times, it is a necessity that we must go looking for them, whether they're hiding in the bathroom, skipping a class, or whether they stayed at home last week just because they didn't feel like coming. Each year, new students enter with the hope that the things their friends have told them about the class, about me, will manifest itself in their year. See, my school is a revolving door, and yet students expect me to be there. The majority of students I teach can only find 3 teachers in the entire building who taught them in the last 4 years. Yet, they come expecting me to push them, to challenge them, to draw lines in the sand, to make sure that what we are doing will be relevant as they see college in their future. They expect me to build the bridge, to be the bridge between the places from which they are trying to escape and the place to which they're running to for freedom. I understand who I am. I understand why I go back. I understand why I push and push and push. I understand why for the last 6 years and almost every single Saturday and even during the holiday breaks, I open the doors of the school. Partly, and they come in, partly because I ask, but partly because I tell them people taking senior English in the suburbs are not reading Sharon Draper in class. They're not reading Walter D. Myers. They're reading Shakespeare. They're reading Beowulf. They're reading books that will prepare them for college, and they must not fall into the trap that being black means reading black only. I return every year because all culture is relevant. And student achievement will only occur when students understand that the world they live in is a particle of dust in the macrocosm and not the nucleus of a microcosm. I go back because of that young lady at that Kmart on Dabney Drive in Henderson, North Carolina, who asked as I pulled into her lane with the house full of with that basket full of new house things, "You must either be the new manager at Wendy's or the new school teacher." Only to meet her sister Takia at open house, who exited yelling down the hallway, "We got a black man for an English teacher." I could not even begin to fathom the relevance of Takia's statement in 1992. But in 2016, again, I understand who I am. Because for 23 years in almost every school where I've taught, I have been the only black male students have encountered in a core subject. Even when I doubt myself, I go back. Because I am Jade's black dad. I am Sheila's daddy. I am Kenneth, Christian's, and Dion's pop. I am the validator of their successes. I am the disciplinarian reminding them of my expectations. I am their role model. It is the unconditional trust my students have in me to be the best teacher that I can be for them. Forget reputation, forget awards. I go back every year to push them and push myself because I've seen what we can become within those four walls. And I know that if I do it well enough, if I strive for excellence, if I push them to be excellent, it will matter for the rest of their lives. To be honest, I go back because once I was like them, and if they got out, I can too. Thank you.
Yeah. So a single story of what good teaching looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And I'm hoping that today we started to break that down a little bit more than we already have over the last couple of years. Teaching is not a one-size-fits-all profession. There's no cookie-cutter mold for this. You're going to also notice that there was no stand and deliver. Nobody was carried off stage here on the shoulders of students like in the Dead Poets Society, ladies and gentlemen. No, these are real people with real stories. So the first part here has to be a dare. I'm not talking about Reagan drug education here, no. I'm talking about a dare for y'all to go out and find a profession that is more blood-boiling and frustrating, more time-consuming, more sleep-depriving than teaching. It's a dare for you to go and find a profession that is more fun and more love-bearing than being in the classroom. And Rumi, the poet, not my son, he can't talk yet, but he says that we should surround ourselves with those who fan our flames. When I hear Jenny preach about the sacred profession, or I feel Ed's emotion that he has for literature and his students, I feel less tired and I feel like my flames are being fanned. When I think about Abby Morin Gartland down in San Antonio, when I think about Emily Bisso in the Brooklyn, and I think about Dan Sunruay, who I've taught alongside of for the last 7 years, I think about Mr. Mack in Crown Heights. I think about Ira and Shyla, two of my educational heroes. I think about Shannon Ortiz Wong and the beautiful boys that she teaches. I think about my wife, who is also a badass teacher. And I feel less tired. And I feel like I can grow up and grow old in this work. And that's good, because y'all are too damn young to start talking about being tired. And so with that, I want you to go be well and teach like hell. Thank you.